When archaeologist Dr. Marcus Rivera deciphered the final symbol on a 500-year-old Inca map, he realized that the legendary treasure of Paititi wasn't gold. It was something far more valuable and dangerous. Dr. Marcus Rivera had spent 23 years chasing legends through the dense jungles of South America, but he had never found anything that compared to the discovery waiting in the archives of the University of Cusco. The manuscript had been overlooked for decades, filed away with dozens of other colonial documents that historians had dismissed as fanciful tales written by Spanish conquistadors trying to impress their distant kings. But Marcus recognized something in the faded ink drawings that made his pulse quicken. These weren't the fantasies of gold-hungry explorers, but detailed maps created by indigenous scribes who had survived the conquest and hidden their most sacred knowledge in plain sight. The document purported to be the testimony of Tupac Hualpa, one of the last royal engineers of the Inca Empire, who had escaped the siege of Cusco in 1536, carrying with him the locations of sacred sites that the Spanish would never be allowed to find. But unlike other treasure maps that promised hoards of gold and silver, Tupac Hualpa's drawings depicted something far more intriguing: architectural complexes that seemed to combine Inca stonework with design principles that didn't match any known pre-Columbian civilization in the Americas. Marcus had learned to read the symbolic language that indigenous communities use to encode sensitive information, and the deeper he studied the manuscript, the more convinced he became that it described real locations. The maps showed a series of connected sites throughout the Amazon basin, each marked with symbols that suggested they served as repositories for knowledge rather than treasure in the conventional sense. Astronomical observatories, libraries carved into living rock, and ceremonial centers that had been deliberately concealed from Spanish eyes by master builders who understood that their civilization's greatest wealth lay in its accumulated wisdom. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized that the seemingly random placement of the sites actually followed ley lines, ancient paths of spiritual and electromagnetic energy that indigenous communities had recognized for millennia. When he plotted the coordinates on modern satellite imagery, a pattern emerged that revealed the locations were positioned to take advantage of natural phenomena that Western science was only beginning to understand. Underground water sources, mineral deposits, and geological formations that created unique acoustic and electromagnetic properties. But what truly captured Marcus's attention were the warnings written in the margins of the manuscript. Tupac Hualpa had included detailed cautions about the dangers of disturbing these sites without proper spiritual preparation, describing catastrophic events that had befallen Spanish expeditions that had attempted to force their way into sacred spaces. The engineer wrote of entire companies of conquistadors found dead without visible wounds, of equipment that malfunctioned inexplicably, and of men who emerged from certain locations speaking in languages that no one could identify. Marcus understood that he was looking at more than just historical curiosity. He was examining evidence of a sophisticated protection system that had kept these sacred sites hidden for 5 centuries. The indigenous communities had developed methods of safeguarding their most important knowledge that went beyond physical concealment to include psychological and spiritual barriers that discouraged unwanted intrusion. If he was going to investigate these sites, he would need to approach them with the same respect and preparation that the original builders had required. The question that haunted Marcus as he prepared for his expedition was whether modern archaeological methods would be sufficient to safely explore locations that had been protected by forms of knowledge that Western science didn't fully recognize. But the potential discovery was too significant to ignore. If Tupac Hualpa's manuscript was accurate, these hidden sites could revolutionize understanding of pre-Columbian civilization and reveal forms of indigenous knowledge that could benefit the entire world. 6 months later, Marcus found himself trekking through some of the most remote territory in the Peruvian Amazon, accompanied by a team that represented an unusual collaboration between academic archaeology and indigenous knowledge. His guide was Amaru Condori, a Quechua elder whose family had maintained oral traditions about the hidden sites for 15 generations. Alongside them traveled Dr. Sofia Mendez, a specialist in pre-Columbian architecture, and 2 graduate students whose Excitement about the expedition was tempered by growing awareness of the spiritual protocols they were expected to observe. Amaru had been reluctant to participate until Marcus demonstrated his genuine respect for indigenous intellectual property and agreed to share any discoveries according to traditional protocols rather than conventional academic publication. These places were hidden for good reasons, the elder explained as they made camp beside a tributary of the Urubamba River. My ancestors didn't conceal them from the Spanish, only to have them exposed by modern treasure hunters. If you want to find what you're looking for, you must understand that some knowledge comes with responsibilities that last generations. The first site on Tupac Hualpa's map was supposed to be located 3 days' journey from the nearest navigable river, hidden within a canyon system that didn't appear on any modern topographical survey. Marcus had initially planned to use GPS coordinates and satellite imaging to locate the ruins, but Amaru insisted that technology alone would be insufficient. The ancestors built these places to be found only by those who understand the old ways of seeing, he said, leading the team along paths that seemed to exist more in his memory than in the physical landscape. On the second day of their search, they encountered the first sign that they were approaching something extraordinary. The forest around them began to change in subtle ways that would have been invisible to untrained observers. The trees grew in patterns that suggested deliberate cultivation rather than natural growth, and the animal life showed behaviors that indicated the presence of ancient human activity. Birds followed specific flight paths that seemed to mark invisible boundaries, and the local indigenous communities they encountered spoke of the area with a reverence that went beyond normal territorial respect. Dr. Sophia was the first to spot the actual ruins, though she almost missed them because they had been so skillfully integrated into the natural landscape. What appeared to be a natural rock formation revealed itself under closer inspection to be precisely fitted stonework that surpassed even the famous walls of Sacsayhuaman in its technical sophistication. The builders had used techniques that allowed the structures to appear completely natural from a distance while maintaining the geometric precision that characterized the finest Inca architecture. But as they began to document the site, Marcus realized that they had found something that challenged everything he thought he knew about pre-Columbian construction capabilities. The stonework showed evidence of tool marks that didn't match any known indigenous technology, and the architectural elements incorporated mathematical principles that shouldn't have been available to American civilizations before European contact. Most puzzling of all, certain sections of the structure seemed to have been modified or expanded long after the Spanish conquest, suggesting that the site had remained in active use by communities that had successfully concealed their activities for centuries. Amaru observed the team's growing excitement with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "This is only the outer chamber," he told them as they measured and photographed the visible structures. "The real treasures are deeper inside, but they require preparation that goes beyond your scientific training. Tonight, we perform the ceremonies that will allow the ancestors to decide whether you are worthy to see what they have protected for so long." Marcus felt a chill of anticipation mixed with apprehension, realizing that their expedition was about to cross the line between conventional archaeology and something far more mysterious and potentially dangerous. The ceremony that Amaru conducted that evening was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his decades of working with indigenous communities. As darkness fell over their camp, the elder created a circle of carefully selected stones around a small fire, each stone representing one of the cardinal directions and the spiritual forces that guarded the hidden knowledge they sought to access. The ritual involved offerings of coca leaves, chicha de jora, and personal items that each team member was asked to contribute as a sign of their sincere intentions and respect for the ancient guardians. "The ancestors require proof that you come seeking wisdom rather than wealth," Amaru explained, as he blessed each offering with prayers spoken in Quechua, so ancient that even he admitted he understood only fragments of their original meaning. "They have watched too many outsiders arrive with promises of respect, only to steal what they find and forget the communities that preserved it for them." Marcus felt the weight of centuries of exploitation and broken promises as he placed his grandfather's compass in the offering circle, understanding that this gesture represented more than just participation in a ritual. During the night, Each member of the expedition experienced vivid dreams that seemed to test their worthiness to enter the deeper chambers of the hidden site. Marcus found himself standing before a council of indigenous elders from different time periods, all demanding to know what he intended to do with the knowledge he hoped to discover. In the dream, he had to justify not just his research methods, but his entire career, explaining how his work had benefited the communities whose ancestors had created the sites he studied. The scrutiny was intense and deeply personal, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about academic privilege and cultural appropriation. Dr. Sophia's dream took a different form, showing her visions of the construction techniques used to build the hidden chambers. She watched indigenous engineers using tools and methods that combined practical knowledge with spiritual practices, creating structures that were designed not just to last for centuries, but to actively protect the knowledge they contained. In her vision, she understood that the buildings themselves were not mere containers, but active participants in safeguarding the wisdom they housed, capable of responding to the intentions and spiritual preparation of those who sought to enter them. When dawn broke, Amaru examined each team member with the careful attention of someone who could read the spiritual impact of their nocturnal experiences. He spent long minutes studying their faces and asking questions about details from their dreams that he shouldn't have been able to know. "The ancestors have decided to trust you," he finally announced, "but they require that you understand the true nature of what you're seeking. The treasures hidden in these places are not objects that can be removed and displayed in museums. They are living knowledge that must be experienced and understood rather than simply documented." The entrance to the deeper chambers was concealed behind what appeared to be a natural rock slide, but Amaru knew exactly which stones to move to reveal a passageway that had been sealed for decades. As they prepared to enter, he distributed small bundles of herbs that he instructed them to burn if they felt overwhelmed by the spiritual energy inside the hidden rooms. "Some knowledge is too powerful to absorb all at once," he warned. "If you feel dizzy or confused, step back and give yourself time to adjust. The ancestors are patient. They would rather teach slowly than lose students to spiritual overload." The passageway led to a chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The walls were covered with intricate carvings that combined Inca iconography with symbols that didn't match any known American writing system. But more remarkable than the artwork was the atmosphere of the space itself. The air seemed to vibrate with an energy that made Marcus feel simultaneously calm and extraordinarily alert. He realized that they had entered a place where the boundary between archaeological discovery and spiritual experience had completely dissolved, and that everything they found from this point forward would challenge the conventional methods and assumptions of Western academic research. The central chamber revealed treasures that defied every expectation Marcus had developed during his career. Instead of gold artifacts or precious stones, the room contained what could only be described as a three-dimensional library: stone tablets, metal sheets, and crystal formations that had been arranged in complex patterns designed to preserve and transmit knowledge across centuries. But these weren't static displays. As the team moved through the space, the arrangements seemed to respond to their presence, with certain formations glowing softly and others producing barely audible harmonic tones that seemed to carry information directly into their minds. Dr. Sophia approached a wall covered with metallic sheets that appeared to be made from an alloy that shouldn't have existed in pre-Columbian America. The metal was covered with symbols that shifted and changed as she watched, creating a dynamic text that seemed to be teaching her about advanced metallurgy, astronomical calculations, and architectural principles simultaneously. "This isn't just information storage," she whispered to Marcus, her voice filled with awe and confusion. "It's an interactive teaching system that adapts to what the observer needs to learn. I can feel it analyzing my knowledge level and adjusting the complexity of what it's showing me." Amaru moved through the chamber with the confidence of someone who had been prepared for this moment his entire life. He explained that the knowledge preservation system had been created by master builders who understood that information needed to be alive and responsive to remain useful across generations. "Your books and computers store dead knowledge," he told the stunned academics. "These systems preserve living wisdom that can grow and adapt as the world changes. That's why they were so important to hide from the Spanish, not because they contained gold, but because they represented a completely different way of understanding and preserving human knowledge. The most extraordinary discovery was a series of crystal formations that appeared to function as a communication network, connecting this hidden site to others throughout the Amazon basin. When Marcus placed his hands on one of the larger crystals, he experienced a flood of sensory information that showed him glimpses of other chambers, other communities, and other guardians who had maintained this network of sacred knowledge for centuries. He saw indigenous scientists working on problems that modern researchers were only beginning to recognize: climate regulation, sustainable agriculture, and medical treatments that use the forest's biodiversity in ways that pharmaceutical companies were desperately trying to replicate. But the team's euphoria at their discovery was tempered by the growing realization that they were witnessing something that could be catastrophically misused if it fell into the wrong hands. The knowledge preservation systems contained information about ecological management, resource extraction, and population control that could either help solve humanity's greatest challenges or accelerate its destruction, depending on the intentions of those who accessed it. Marcus began to understand why Tupac Hualpa and generations of indigenous guardians had chosen to keep these sites hidden rather than risk their exploitation by people who might use the knowledge for harmful purposes. The deeper chambers revealed the true scope of the indigenous knowledge network. Maps carved into living rock showed connections between sites throughout South America, with detailed information about seasonal migrations, resource management, and ceremonial cycles that had maintained ecological balance for thousands of years. The system represented a form of continental-scale environmental management that made modern conservation efforts look primitive by comparison. But accessing this knowledge required not just intellectual understanding, but spiritual preparation and community accountability that ensured it would be used responsibly. As the day progressed, each team member found themselves profoundly changed by their exposure to the ancient knowledge systems. They had expected to make archaeological discoveries that would enhance their academic careers, but instead, they had encountered forms of wisdom that challenged their fundamental assumptions about the relationship between knowledge, responsibility, and human survival. The question that haunted them all was whether the modern world was capable of learning from these ancient teachings without repeating the mistakes that had made it necessary to hide them in the first place. The revelation that changed everything came when Marcus accessed the final chamber, a circular room that functioned as the control center for the entire knowledge network. Here, the crystal communication system revealed its true purpose. It wasn't just preserving ancient wisdom, but actively monitoring and managing ecological conditions across the entire Amazon basin in real time. The indigenous communities hadn't just hidden their knowledge from the Spanish. They had created a living system that continued to protect and maintain the rainforest's balance centuries after the conquest, operating in secret while the outside world remained completely unaware of its existence. Dr. Sophia stared in amazement at displays that showed current weather patterns, river levels, and wildlife populations throughout the region, all tracked through a combination of natural sensors and human observers, who reported to the network through traditional ceremonies and seasonal gatherings. "This is impossible," she whispered, watching as the crystalline formations updated information about deforestation rates, illegal mining operations, and climate changes in real time. How can a system built with pre-Columbian technology be monitoring satellite-level data about contemporary environmental conditions? Amaru smiled at her confusion, explaining that the ancestors had created something far more sophisticated than satellites or computer networks. They built a system that uses the forest itself as a sensor network, he said, gesturing toward formations that seemed to pulse with living energy. Every tree, every river, every animal is connected to this system through spiritual and biological relationships that your science is only beginning to understand. The network doesn't just observe the forest, it is the forest, and the forest is the network. The most shocking discovery was that the system had been actively intervening to protect the rainforest from modern threats. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the displays showed how the network had influenced weather patterns to flood illegal logging camps, guided indigenous communities to intercept poaching operations, and even affected the mental state of government officials to influence policy decisions that impacted forest protection. The indigenous guardians weren't just preserving ancient knowledge, they were using it to wage a sophisticated campaign of ecological defense that had been operating invisibly for decades. But the system also revealed the scope of the current crisis. The displays showed environmental damage accumulating faster than the network's protective mechanisms could counteract, with critical thresholds being approached that could trigger irreversible ecological collapse. The ancient knowledge preservation system was sending out urgent calls for help, trying to activate dormant sites and awaken sleeping guardians who had the power to address threats that exceeded the network's current capabilities. Marcus realized that his discovery wasn't just an archaeological breakthrough, it was a recruitment effort by intelligences that understood the planet was approaching a point of no return. The crystal formations began to communicate directly with the team, offering each member the opportunity to become permanent guardians of the network in exchange for access to knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of ecology, medicine, and sustainable technology. But the offer came with conditions that challenged everything they thought they knew about academic research and career success. They would have to abandon their university positions, commit to living in indigenous communities, and dedicate their lives to protecting and serving a system that could never be fully documented or published in conventional academic journals. Dr. Sophia was the first to understand the magnitude of the choice they faced. The knowledge contained in the network could solve climate change, end resource scarcity, and create sustainable prosperity for the entire human species. But accessing it required surrendering the individualistic mindset that drove modern academic competition and embracing a form of collective responsibility that would fundamentally transform their identities and priorities. "We came here looking for treasures we could take back to our world," she said quietly. "But the real treasure is the opportunity to join a world that's been working to save the planet while we've been destroying it." As the sun set over the hidden chamber, Marcus found himself facing the most important decision of his life. He could return to his university with incomplete documentation of an extraordinary discovery, maintaining his academic career while knowing that he had walked away from the chance to help address humanity's greatest challenges. Or he could accept the invitation to become part of something larger than any individual achievement, trading personal recognition for the opportunity to serve a form of collective wisdom that had been protecting the Earth for centuries. 3 years after their discovery, Marcus Rivera stood before a gathering of indigenous leaders from across the Americas, no longer the university professor who had sought ancient treasures, but a guardian who had learned that true wealth lay in serving something greater than personal ambition. He had made his choice that day in the hidden chamber, as had Dr. Sophia and 2 of their graduate students. Only one team member had chosen to return to the academic world, carrying with him carefully limited documentation that hinted at extraordinary discoveries while protecting the network's operational security. The transformation hadn't been easy. Marcus had spent months learning to quiet his analytical mind enough to receive the direct knowledge transmissions that the crystal network used to communicate with its guardians. He had studied traditional medicine with shamans whose understanding of plant biochemistry exceeded anything taught in modern universities, and had mastered navigation techniques that allowed him to find hidden sites without any technological assistance. Most challenging of all, he had learned to think in terms of collective responsibility rather than individual achievement, understanding that his discoveries belonged not to him, but to the communities that had preserved them. Dr. Sophia had undergone an even more dramatic transformation, becoming a bridge between the ancient architectural knowledge and modern construction challenges. Working with indigenous engineers, she had helped develop building techniques that used the network's principles to create structures that actively contributed to ecological health rather than just minimizing environmental damage. Their projects had begun attracting attention from sustainable development organizations around the world, though the true source of their innovations remained carefully concealed. The network had grown stronger with each new guardian who joined its ranks. Climate scientists discovered monitoring capabilities that surpassed anything their satellites could provide. Medical researchers gained access to pharmaceutical knowledge that promised revolutionary treatments for diseases that had plagued humanity for for millennia. Agricultural specialists learned farming techniques that could feed growing populations, while actually enhancing rather than depleting the land's fertility. But all of this knowledge came with the understanding that it belonged to the earth itself and could only be used in ways that honored the balance between human needs and ecological health. The most remarkable development had been the network's expansion beyond the Amazon basin. As more guardians joined the system, they discovered that similar knowledge preservation sites existed throughout the indigenous world, in the mountains of Tibet, the deserts of Australia, the forests of North America, and the islands of the Pacific. Each regional network had developed its own specializations and protective strategies, but all were connected through communication systems that predated any known civilization and operated according to principles that transcended conventional understanding of technology and consciousness. Marcus often reflected on the irony that he had spent his career searching for lost civilizations, only to discover that they weren't lost at all. They had simply chosen to become invisible to a world that wasn't ready to use their knowledge responsibly. The treasure maps and legends that had driven his academic research had been real, but they had led him to something far more valuable than gold or ancient artifacts. They had shown him a path to participating in humanity's oldest and most sophisticated effort to maintain the balance between civilization and the natural world. As he watched young indigenous activists learning to use the network's capabilities to protect their ancestral territories from modern threats, Marcus understood that their small group of converted academics had become part of something that was quietly revolutionizing environmental protection and sustainable development around the world. The knowledge they had discovered wasn't just ancient wisdom preserved in hidden chambers. It was a living system that was actively evolving to address contemporary challenges while maintaining principles that had sustained human civilization for thousands of years. The legendary treasure of Paititi had indeed been found, but it turned out to be something that couldn't be carried away or displayed in museums. It was the opportunity to join a global community of guardians who had been working for centuries to ensure that humanity's greatest achievements would be its wisdom rather than its wealth, its harmony with nature rather than its conquest of it. In choosing to serve this treasure rather than possess it, Marcus had discovered that the real riches of the Amazon weren't hidden in its depths. They were flowing through its every leaf, stream, and breath, waiting for anyone wise enough to become part of the network that had been protecting them all along. Marcus's incredible journey reminds us that the greatest treasures aren't always what we expect to find. Sometimes the real wealth lies in discovering our purpose and choosing service over personal gain. If this story opened your mind to new possibilities, subscribe for more Amazon mysteries that challenge everything we think we know, and share your thoughts. What would you sacrifice to be part of something bigger than yourself?